China wants to make Taiwan part of the mainland, but would prefer not to have to go to war. So instead, China's trying to invade Taiwan's economy. Just when you think the CCP couldn't get any creepier, they're trying to be the world's evilest sugar daddy. Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. Taiwan has developed a bad case of Stockholm Syndrome. China's made it abundantly clear that it plans to take over Taiwan. That's practically their catchphrase at this point. What are we going to do tomorrow, Xi? The same thing we do every day, try to take over Taiwan. I'm really not digging this remake of Pinko, Kami, and the Brain. China hasn't ruled out using force either. In fact, it constantly is putting out propaganda showing how the attack would look. Taiwan is already being attacked by 5 million cyber attacks a day, and Chinese warplanes keep intruding on Taiwan's air defense identification zone. The message China is trying to send is that resistance is futile and that Taiwan should just submit. Now, the message they're actually sending is the same as a short guy who buys a fancy car. It's super obvious you're compensating for something. And yet, despite all that, Taiwan has been running directly into China's arms. No, not those arms, thankfully. You see, Taiwan has let itself become completely economically dependent on China. Not only is China Taiwan's biggest export market, but it imports almost as much from China as the next two countries combined. That means China is Taiwan's biggest trading partner. This would be like if you made your lunch money by selling items to your bully only for them to then threaten to steal it back from you. So how did this happen? Did it develop organically, or was this some Machiavellian plan on China's part? As you probably guessed, it's the second one. When the China-friendly Kuomintang Party was in power in 2010, China got Taiwan to sign a free trade agreement with it. It's called the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement, ECFA, and it gives Taiwan very, very favorable treatment. The initial agreement cut tariffs on 539 Taiwanese exports to China and only cut tariffs on 267 Chinese products entering Taiwan. To put that in dollars and cents, tariffs were cut on almost $14 billion worth of Taiwanese goods and less than $3 billion of Chinese goods. Because China's so giving and altruistic, you see. Here's an actual picture of them offering the deal to Taiwan. In fact, the deal was so favorable, it's been compared to the way China treats Hong Kong and Macau. And if you know your geography, you'll know those are both part of China. Like I said, Machiavellian planning. When Taiwan and China were negotiating the deal, it was initially called the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, or CECA. But there were some problems with that, so in 2009, China changed it to the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement, or ECFA. As you can guess by the name change, this was a very controversial deal, and not just because they should have changed it to the superior acronym FACE. Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, which is currently in power, rallied against the trade agreement. They were worried that the deal was just part of Beijing's unification agenda and that it would erode Taiwan's sovereignty. And boy, were they ever right. The DPP didn't have the votes to stop it, though, and the deal passed in the legislature. Now, despite the obvious issues with making a deal with the devil, there were some really strong incentives for Taiwan to make the deal. I'll tell you what those were right after the break. Welcome back. If you saw a black screen just now, it's because, unlike Taiwan, we're not interested in making a deal with the devil. Advertisers don't want their ads shown on our videos because it could hurt their chances of doing business in China. So that's why we rely on support from viewers like you directly on the crowdfunding website Patreon. That's patreon.com/China Uncensored. You can contribute as little as $1 an episode, and as a perk, I'll answer your questions at the end of the show. I'll tell you more at the end. So why on earth would Taiwan want to sign a trade deal with a China that clearly wanted to extend its influence over Taiwan? Well, there were some compelling reasons. One was that Taiwan's economy was stagnating, while China's was growing. When the deal was signed in 2010, Taiwan's GDP growth was in the negative. China's growth was not only positive, but it was growing faster than most other countries in the world at the time. That is, if you believe the economic data China was putting out, which you probably shouldn't. China has been known to, shall we say, embellish its GDP data, which should have been a pretty big red flag for Taiwan. That, in addition to this big red flag. Man, why do so many people have trouble seeing this? The other reason Taiwan wanted the deal was because China was shutting it out of other free trade agreements with other countries. If Taiwan had its own free trade agreements, people might start to think Taiwan was an independent country, you see. Taiwan went into the deal hoping to negotiate a spot at the table for free trade agreements. But China wouldn't have it. When asked about free trade agreements for Taiwan after the deal was signed, a Chinese official told reporters, "We'll have to properly handle this issue," and that Taiwan shouldn't worry because the two sides of the Taiwan Strait are family. If you're not versed in CCP speak, allow me to translate. That means no, never, and Taiwan should definitely worry because there's a reason we didn't put that in black and white. Such a beautiful language. Fast forward to now, and things are pretty much as Taiwan's DPP feared. Taiwan's trade with China has increased dramatically, and China is still blocking Taiwan from making free trade agreements. Also, Taiwan's economic dependence on it gives China a huge political and military advantage. For example, after U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi traveled to Taiwan last August, China banned a number of Taiwanese agricultural goods. This was supposedly because they had pests and excessive chemicals, but as my favorite state-run media, the Global Times, admitted, it was really a punishment and a warning to the secessionists in Taiwan. Secessionists? How can you secede from something that you're obviously not a part of? That'd be like Jesse Smollett announcing he was leaving Mensa. Taiwanese citizens who are worried about China's influence over Taiwan would like to see the ECFA abolished. And not just because it's the wrong acronym. They could have said, you can shove that deal in your face. But it's not just about influence peddling. Another reason they don't like it is that it didn't turn out the way Ma Ying-jeou sold it. For example, China blocked Taiwan from signing a free trade agreement with Australia in 2018 by telling Canberra that it would hurt relations with Beijing. This is like telling an acquaintance not to ask out your girlfriend when you've not only never been on a date with her, but she filed a restraining order against you. Taiwan does have 9 free trade agreements, or 8 if you don't count the ECFA, but those were mostly negotiated despite Beijing's pressure campaigns and not with its blessing. Beijing makes countries choose between having diplomatic relations with China or Taiwan, and some nations do choose Taiwan. So naturally, of the 9 countries Taiwan has free trade agreements with, 5 of them have current diplomatic relations with Taiwan. And 2 of them had diplomatic relations with Taiwan when the agreements were signed. The last 2, New Zealand and Singapore, were both signed during a honeymoon period in China-Taiwan relations. Oh, Taiwan, I love you so much right now that I might just let you sign some free trade agreements. According to David Brown, an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, Beijing likely allowed those 2 agreements to happen as a favor to the China-friendly Ma Ying-jeou government. But Taiwan still had to tread carefully. When Taiwan signed its free trade deal with Singapore in 2013, it tiptoed around Beijing by calling itself a separate customs territory of Taiwan, Penghu, Jinmen, and Matsu, rather than a nation. It was also careful not to call the deal a free trade agreement either. Instead, it called it an economic partnership. Taiwan negotiated a free trade agreement with New Zealand the same year, and just like with Singapore, it worked hard to avoid the perception that this was an agreement between 2 countries. Ma Ying-jeou hoped that signing these 2 trade agreements would pave the way for Taiwan to join blocs like the Trans-Pacific Partnership and make a deal with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Spoiler alert, that didn't happen. I'll tell you what did happen after this final commercial break. Welcome back. Taiwan's dreams of joining larger economic blocs in the Pacific fell through. What did happen, though, was that Taiwan became increasingly dependent on China. Who could have guessed? That's despite the Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, which is not at all a China-friendly party in Taiwan, and it came in power in 2016. As I mentioned earlier, the DPP protested the ECFA, and current President Tsai Ing-wen even challenged Ma Ying-jeou in a public debate on the issue before it was signed. But when the DPP came into power, it didn't cancel the agreement, as you might expect. As recently as this year, Taiwan's trade minister even recommended keeping it. It's because they've become completely dependent on it. Pulling out would be like throwing away your cell phone. You could, But do you really want to go back to printing out directions from MapQuest? Strangely, the one threatening to suspend the agreement has actually been China. Earlier this year, it accused Taiwan of putting up trade barriers on about 2,400 Chinese products. Taiwan said those barriers were put in place to protect national security and certain Taiwan industries, and that it didn't plan to back down. And I assume China responded, "Oh, you don't let us invade your borders or your trade barriers? I'm starting to think you're afraid of us just because we constantly threaten your existence." So why is the DPP leaving the agreement in place? Well, Taiwan's trade minister said removing it at this point would hurt Taiwan's economy. Like I said, Machiavellian plan on China's part. It appears that Taiwan is trying to find a replacement for China before it cuts off trade. So instead of just tossing away their cell phone, they want to switch from iPhone to Samsung, which is a perfect analogy since those aren't made in China. Shortly after she came to power, President Tsai Ing-wen unveiled her government's new southbound policy. This was an initiative to increase trade, investment, and exchanges between Taiwan and Southeast Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. Some say this policy has helped Taiwan snip Chinese economic ties. They point to the way it has shifted Taiwanese investment. In 2019, investment from Taiwan in new southbound policy countries grew by 16%, while investment in China fell by 51%. That's a good sign. But if covering China for as long as I have has taught me anything, it's that hope is a mirage in the desert of life. If you look at other numbers, it's not so positive. All 18 southbound countries combined accounted for just 19.8% of Taiwan's trade in 2022, while mainland China and Hong Kong accounted for 38.8%. For those who are math challenged, like non-Mensa member Jesse Smollett, China's trade with Taiwan was almost double all 18 southbound countries combined. It's the same when you look at trade growth since the new southbound policy was unveiled. Since 2016, trade with China and Hong Kong has accounted for 40% of Taiwan's trade growth. New southbound policy countries, on the other hand, accounted for less than 20%. In 2018, Taiwan unveiled incentives to lure Taiwanese companies back from China. It's not clear how effective that's been. But what does seem to be effective at luring business back from China is China. How China handled the pandemic, its poor economy, and its threats of war are all reason Taiwanese businesses say they're moving out. Because, threats of war weren't enough. But once they saw China was inept, that's when they knew it was time to let go. The US-China trade war Trump started in 2018 was another reason. But as long as China is still Taiwan's biggest trading partner, China's going to continue to exploit that weakness. Some say the reason China opened a trade investigation over Taiwanese barriers to its good is because it wants to weaken the DPP government ahead of the 2024 elections. It's all part of Pinko Kami and the Brain's plan to do what they do every night, try and take over Taiwan. And now it's time for me to answer a question from a fan who supports China Uncensored on our exclusive social media platform on Locals. Today's question comes from Hontus F. Much has been made of an official map released by China's Ministry of Natural Resources. Does this map represent a true statement of what the CCP claims? Would top CCP leadership have been aware of this and have to sign off on this map? Great question. So recently, China unveiled this map, calling it the Standard Map 2023. At first glance, it doesn't seem like anything big, but China managed to piss off a lot of countries with a single map. The map labels a bunch of places as Chinese territory when in fact they are not. We have Arunachal Pradesh and Aksai Chin, which belongs to India, Taiwan, which belongs to Taiwan, the Paracel Islands, which belongs to Vietnam, Scarborough Shoal, which belongs to the Philippines, and all of the Spratly Islands, which are claimed by Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia. And even the Bolskoye-Yuriske Islands, which Russia claims. And the famous 9-dash line is now a 10-dash line. I'm pretty certain this must have been approved at high levels of the CCP. Most of the world's maps are made in China, and China has passed laws that mandate maps are made in a certain way. Here's a fun game. Anytime you see a globe, have a look to see if the 9-dash line is on it. By changing everyone's maps, China wants to change how people think about the world. Namely, make it a more Chinese world. We did a full episode on how China is changing maps. Check it out here. And if you want to support China Uncensored, join our exclusive social media platform on ChinaUncensored.locals.com. The link is below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.